All right, we're talking about transitional effects. Now, we hear these sorts of transitional effects in virtually every genre of dance music. Oftentimes, guys are just grabbing them from sample CDs. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you really don't want to be identified. You don't want to be caught with your hand in the cookie jar using and reusing a lot of the same risers and samples and just plug and play stuff that everybody else has access to. Now, you can always bring those samples in and affect them, but a lot of guys will actually go ahead and build their transitional effects, build their risers and that sort of thing from scratch. Even if you don't really want to do that, I definitely suggest that you know how they're done. So here's what I've done. I've brought in an ES2. Now I want you to understand that all of this stuff can be applied in all of your different DAWs. I'm just working in Logic, but all of this stuff will apply to different synths that you may own, and certainly just the types of automation curves that we're going to be writing. Those are all available in every DAW. So all I've done here is turn on oscillator 3 and set it to the noise. So when we hit it, we hear that it's just white noise. Now, as you can see, it's being sent to this cutoff here, right? So as I have the cutoff down, I can open it up, right? So the first thing that I might do is jump on over here to touch or latch mode, and I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to hit A for automation, so you can see the line as it stands right now. And then I'm going to hit the spacebar, and as I hit the spacebar, you'll notice that it updates automatically as I touch this cutoff. Right now, I don't have to spend much time drawing a line. Certainly, you can actually perform something in that you like. But really, what I'll do then is just highlight all of these nodes, hit delete. Now, this is one of your best friends right here is your marquee tool. In this case, I'm going to assign that marquee tool to my right click. I'm going to highlight the entire region and just click again, and it'll give me these 4 nodes. Now, from here, I can actually create a nice detailed ramp that I want this white noise to follow. So let's have a listen. That's the sort of thing that we hear often. Okay, now you'll notice that there's a little bit of delay on there. Now that might be the next step here is on bus 1, I've set up a stereo delay. Now this stereo delay is actually doing a ping pong setting. I found it difficult to find any specifically designed ping pong settings for this stereo delay in Logic. But here's the idea. Your left delay is going to be off, your right delay is on. So the signal comes into this right delay, and then we cross feed right to left. So I'm sending this right to the left, okay? And then from here, I'm sending the left back to the right. And you'll notice that I have both of the note values, both of the subdivisions sitting at quarter note. So what's happening is it's coming into the right, it's going to the left, and then the left is sending it back to the right. So it's ping-ponging back and forth between left and right in the stereo field. So let's go ahead and have a listen to a little bit of the tail. And I'm going to bring this last note up for dramatic effect. Right now I can have that go on, the delay go on and be a little bit more dramatic. Sometimes less is more because, especially with delays, you might end up in the situation where you're really clouding your mix with too many things just layering on top of themselves. Now here's another way, a next step to actually take it into even more detailed territory. I brought up this telephone notch filter, which is basically just a combination of using this high pass filter and this low pass filter. I'm going to go ahead and hit compare. And cranking them way up and finding sort of this sweet spot where I've ducked out a ton of bass and a ton of highs. And let's just go ahead and listen to what's happening on the auxiliary channel with that particular EQ setting. As you can tell, it's what we would describe as very band passed. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is bring up Logic's clip distortion, and we're just going to put a little dirt on this signal on the auxiliary. So now we have the dry signal happening at the channel, the delay itself, the EQ, and then this little bit of distortion to kind of give it, again, more identity. I'm going to put this back in read mode, and let's go ahead and see what we're working with. That's kind of the bare bones beginning of making your own white noise transitional sounds. All right, let's get into a little bit more detail about these white noise risers. We're going to look at a different way of making them. Here I've got the ES2 brought up again, and as you can see, I've simply got that noise on the third oscillator. But this time what I've done is I've opened up this second oscillator as well as this first oscillator. Let's not worry about oscillator 1 right now. Let's just look at bringing a little bit of 2 in. And I'm going to bypass these because these are what we're about to talk about. So you hear that there's a pitch now involved with that white noise, but that pitch isn't really doing anything. We don't really have any fancy kind of motion going on with it at all. So what I'm going to do is set cutoff 1 to be controlled by LFO 1, and now all of a sudden this cutoff is actually being controlled by this LFO curve right here. So let's just listen to what that does to our sound. So as you can hear, it's subtle, but the cutoff, this cutoff 1 right here, is actually being slowly controlled by this curve being generated by this LFO. Now here's where things actually start to get really cool. I'm going to have pitch 2, which is this second oscillator right here, controlled by LFO 2. Now on LFO 2, I have it set to 4 bars because that's how long this riser is, 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. So listen what happens now, and I've cranked up this little meter right here inside of the modulation bridge to show what happens when we drive that a little harder. So now we have this cool pitch bend being written into the synth. And there's no real automation going on with the exception of this filter automation being affected right here. We also have this pitch 1 sitting right here. And what I've done with pitch 1 is I've bumped that up an octave and I've detuned both of these oscillators. One's up 10 cents and the other's down 10 cents to sort of give like a little bit of a stereo spread. A little bit of a phasing effect. They're slightly out of tune with each other, which can give us some good fatness. Then pitch 1 is also being controlled now by LFO 2. So let's go ahead and listen to what all 3 of these oscillators are sounding like together. Very cool. So that's something that's working for me. One thing that you might want to be careful of when you're writing these automations is not to have those hard offs. I think that that was actually causing us to have that little kind of hiccup at the end. Let's try one more time and see if that's cleaner. Perhaps not. Opening up the release a little bit. Okay, next what I want to do is, the last thing I want to do in this video is we're going to turn on this unison right here. So what it's telling us now is that we have 6 voices going, and now we're going to hear all of them automatically detuned from each other to create, again, more of a phased out, kind of rich, fatter sound out of this synth. So let's see what we've got when we've got all of these internal modulations going as well as the unison. All right, now I also want to show you this. What we can do is we can set up a bus, an effects bus, with tremolo on there, and this hard panning is kind of a cool, semi-overlooked effect in Logic. I definitely think it's got some power. I've used the hard panning preset right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into touch mode and adjust the amount of send that I'm using. So I'm going to turn it all the way down and hit play. And again, I don't always perform these things in. I usually just get the parameter I need called up in the automation lane, and then use my marquee tool to select the area that I wish to affect, then simply click and it'll give me all these nodes. And I'm just trying to get this sending a little harder as time goes by. So let's just listen to what that's doing. So we should be hearing this sort of very cool sort of stereo effect going on, which is really fun. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is in the actual tremolo itself, I'm going to go ahead and put this back into touch mode. And then I'm going to, instead of having the rate determined by the subdivision, I'm actually just going to put it at 0. And then as this send increases, I'm also going to have the rate increase. Oops, my mistake. That needed to be here. Let's try that again. Right, now again, I'm not going to sit there and write the whole line. I usually just get the automation lane called up, hit delete on the nodes that were created, use my marquee tool, click once, creates all these nodes. Now we're going to go from 0 rate, and it gets cranked over time. Not quite enough. Let's try that again. So that's cool. We get this crazy motion out of that. Okay, so that's another way to approach building and creating your own individual style risers. So let's talk about one more way to create these white noise risers and transitional effects on your own as opposed to grabbing them off sample CDs and that sort of thing. This time, instead of having the pitch rise slaved to this LFO or one of the envelopes like we did in the last couple examples where the pitch bend was actually happening with this internal modulation section, instead, what I've decided to do this time is I've simply opened up the MIDI draw editor, which is underneath the piano roll, and punched in this line from all the way to the bottom to all the way to the top. I'm going to go ahead and delete that real quick. I'm going to switch over to my pencil tool. I'm going to take that pencil tool all the way down and then all the way to where I want to go. Now, a quick tip on that that's actually kind of cool is under Snap MIDI Draw and Automation. Notice what'll happen if, let me go back in time here. Notice what'll happen if I draw my note. It's kind of not right on there, and it's not snapping. It's sort of snapping to the beginning if I go all the way over, but I could accidentally have a little bit of air in the end there, and the second one, you'll notice it'll snap to the very end, but it won't snap early. So what will happen is if I go to Snap MIDI Draw and Automation, it will actually grab on to each one of those subdivisions. So say you want to make sure that your curves that you're writing are dead on beat, or maybe they even arrive a little bit early in peak. That's a good way to do it. That's a really cool tip. Okay, so closing the MIDI Draw editor, we're seeing that the pitch bend is coming from the actual MIDI Draw and not from the internal routing. Now let's just go ahead and listen to what that would do on just a simple pitch. We're going to turn off the white noise. Okay, and you'll notice that, yeah, it's rising, but it's really not rising that much, is it? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to this range and I'm going to crank it from 2 all the way to 36. 2 was just 2 semitones. It was only allowing the pitch to rise 2 semitones. Notice how dramatic this is going to be at 36 semitones. You're going to want to tune this to taste. You're going to want to maybe not go as deep with it or not go as crazy with it. Maybe you ease up on it just a little bit on where it starts and where it ends. That's all up to you. Remembering that as soon as these are done, we're going to probably end up bouncing them in place and using them as audio. This is just sort of the programming that goes into making these sorts of white noise risers and effects. You'll notice that I've also turned off the sends to the delay, the EQ, as well as the clip distortion, all of those kind of cool bus sends that I created earlier. I've turned them off just because I really want to focus on what's happening internally on the ES2. You're going to have to be able to apply this to your own synth if you're not using ES2, but all of these synths, particularly subtractive synths like the ES2, are going to do this in the exact same way. It just might be a different button somewhere, a different window somewhere, that sort of thing. What we've done here is I have cut off 1, which is right here. It's all the way down. That one is now being slaved to the mod wheel on my actual keyboard controller that's sitting right here in front of me. So I'm just going to go to the white noise and hit play and open up my mod wheel. So that's me just wiggling the mod wheel right now. I'm going to go real slow, right? Or real fast. But anyway, I have the cutoff one, its entire range being controlled by the mod wheel. So now the second thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have that same cutoff being messed with by LFO1. So LFO1 has this particular curve right now, nothing too fancy, just pretty much exactly what the stock setting is when you bring up ES2. I do have it set to this square tooth wave, okay? And I have the range set from right here in the middle to just turned up a little bit. So with those two together, I'm getting these overlapping effects with just the mod wheel. Right? Pretty cool. Okay. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have the mod wheel affect the LFO1 rate. So this rate right here, imagine this getting automated, getting turned up as it went and affecting the way that these cutoffs are being played. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit play and play with the mod wheel. And notice that the mod wheel is creating all of this different motion with just these three internal routing ideas. Right, so the rate is increasing as I open up the mod wheel, and the flutter I'm getting out of the cutoff is also doing that as well. So now I'm going to bring a little bit of the pitch back in. Now, you want to be careful here because bringing too much of the pitch back in is actually going to be not a balanced, beautiful effect. It's going to be a little bit brash with just too much of the oscillator pitch happening. But let's listen to what happens with the combination of the pitch automation as well as what's happening with the white noise. All right, very cool. So now what I can do is I can actually just go ahead and hit R for record. And draw in my modulation. This is a little bit different than writing automation inside of the actual arrange window because, again, we're doing all this sort of stuff in this MIDI draw window. So let's bring up the modulation wheel that I just made, okay, and there's all those nodes. It's kind of a little sloppy or whatever. Now what I can do again is I can just switch to my pencil tool, started at the very bottom, and again, because I have this nice snap MIDI draw and automation on, I can actually control it perfectly. So let's see what happens here with this combination of pitch bend and modulation via the modulation wheel. Boom, that's a pretty cool little riser. Maybe I'll have it start with a little more openness. Right? Pretty cool. So that's another way of doing this, and that sort of technique is available inside of all of these different synthesizers. Again, most of these are just the same thing, just housing different windows and GUIs, which is the GUI, which is the graphic user interface. You've got to kind of interpret and reuse this depending on what synth you're trying to do this in, but that is how you would create that sort of internal modulation to write a personalized riser effect. I'm going to go ahead and put my bus back on, and let's see what that sounds like.